The Austronesian migration, how 3000 BCE seafarers built early Filipino society. Around 5,000 years ago, one of humanity's most remarkable journeys began. Small groups of people pushed off from the shores of what is now Taiwan, loaded their boats with everything they'd need to survive, and sailed into the unknown. These weren't accidental drifters or desperate refugees. They were skilled navigators, intentional explorers who would ultimately spread across half the planet. Their descendants would settle islands from Madagascar to Easter Island, but one of their earliest and most significant destinations was the Philippine archipelago. This is the story of the Austronesian migration, a maritime expansion so ambitious and successful that it created one of the world's largest language families and shaped the cultural foundations of early Filipino society. It's a story of incredible seafaring achievement, technological innovation, and cultural persistence that continues to shape the Philippines today. The origins, Taiwan and the push southward. The Austronesian story begins in Taiwan, around 3000 BCE, though the cultural roots stretch back further to the southern Chinese coast. Archaeological evidence from sites like Balangay shows us a picture of these early Austronesian peoples. These were agricultural people who cultivated rice, millet, and root crops, raised pigs and chickens, and had developed sophisticated pottery-making techniques. Their settlements show careful planning, with storage facilities for surplus crops and evidence of hay history lovers. Quick favor before we start. If you enjoyed today's video, please help me reach 500 likes, and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing historical stories. Long-distance trade networks, even before their great maritime expansion began. But they were also something else. Master seafarers. Living on an island, they had developed intimate knowledge of ocean currents, seasonal wind patterns, and celestial navigation. They understood that certain birds and cloud formations indicated land beyond the horizon. They knew how to read the color and movement of water to detect underwater reefs and shallow areas. Why they left Taiwan remains debated among archaeologists and anthropologists. Population pressure seems likely. A growing population on a limited island would eventually need new lands. Resource competition may have played a role, or perhaps environmental changes made certain areas less productive. Climate data suggests this period saw significant changes in sea levels and weather patterns, but we shouldn't discount the simple human drive to explore, to see what lies beyond the horizon. Whatever the combination of reasons, these people possessed both the motivation and the technology to make long ocean crossings possible. They built outrigger canoes, vessels with lateral support floats that provided stability in open water. These weren't crude rafts, but carefully engineered watercraft, often 50 feet or more in length, capable of carrying families, livestock, seeds, and supplies across hundreds of miles of ocean. The outrigger design was revolutionary. It provided stability without excessive weight, allowed the vessel to right itself if overturned, and could be sailed, paddled, or both. The journey to the Philippines. The first Austronesian settlers likely reached the northern Philippines around 2500 to 2000 BCE, though some archaeological evidence suggests even earlier dates. They didn't arrive all at once, but in successive waves over centuries, island hopping down through the archipelago. The Batanes Islands, positioned between Taiwan and Luzon, served as natural stepping stones for this migration. visible from both Taiwan and the northern Philippines on clear days. Archaeological sites in Batanes, particularly at Torongan Cave and Sungit, show clear evidence of this transition. Pottery styles show both Taiwan characteristics and new local innovations. The artifacts reveal people who maintained connections with their homeland while adapting to their new environment. What they found was a landscape already inhabited. The Philippines had been home to earlier peoples, descendants of the first humans who had reached the islands during the last ice age, perhaps 67,000 years ago, when lower sea levels created land bridges and shorter water crossings. These were the Negritos, dark-skinned hunter-gatherers who had lived in the islands for tens of thousands of years. Communities like the modern Eta, Ati, and Mamanwa peoples are their descendants. The encounter between these earlier inhabitants and the newcomers would prove complex, involving both conflict and cooperation, displacement and intermarriage. Some archaeological sites show abrupt changes in artifact styles, suggesting displacement. Others show gradual transitions, indicating periods of coexistence and cultural exchange. Genetic studies of modern Filipino populations reveal DNA from both groups, confirming that intermarriage occurred, though the extent varied by region. The Austronesians didn't simply conquer or replace the existing populations. The genetic and cultural evidence shows mixing and exchange. The Austronesians may have learned about local plants, animals, and environmental conditions from the Negritos, while the Negritos adopted some agricultural practices and technologies. However, over time, the agricultural lifestyle and larger population numbers of the Austronesian migrants meant their culture would become dominant throughout most of the lowlands and coastal areas of the archipelago, while Negrito communities increasingly retreated to highland forests. The technology they brought. What made the Austronesian migration so transformative wasn't just the number of people, but what they carried with them. A complete agricultural and maritime toolkit that would revolutionize life in the islands. First was agriculture itself. The Austronesians introduced systematic farming to the Philippines, bringing domesticated rice, both wet paddy and dryland varieties, along with taro, yams, bananas, breadfruit, and coconuts. Each of these crops required specific knowledge: when to plant, how to prepare the soil, how to store seeds. This wasn't simple gardening, but sophisticated agricultural science passed down through generations. They brought pigs, chickens, and dogs, animals that would become central to Filipino subsistence and culture. Pigs weren't just food. They were wealth, status symbols, and essential to ritual life. Archaeological sites show pig bones in burial contexts, suggesting their importance in funeral practices and beliefs about the afterlife. Chickens provided eggs and meat, while dogs served as hunting companions and, in some communities, food animals. This agricultural package allowed for larger, more settled populations than hunting and gathering could support, perhaps 10 to 20 times the population density. Their pottery marked another dramatic shift. The distinctive red-slipped pottery, with intricate geometric designs, stamped, incised, and painted, represents a major technological achievement. Pottery allowed for better food storage, extending the life of surplus crops. It enabled new cooking methods, particularly the boiling of foods, which made some toxic plants edible after proper preparation. By tracking the distribution of distinctive pottery styles, Archaeologists can trace the Austronesian expansion site, layer by layer. In the Philippines, this pottery tradition evolved into local styles but retained enough similarity to distant relatives in Taiwan and later in Indonesia and beyond to reveal the connections. They also brought sophisticated textile technology, bark cloth production, and eventually weaving. Evidence of spindle whorls and loom weights appears in Austronesian sites. The cultivation of cotton and tobacco would come later, but the knowledge of textile production was already present. Perhaps most importantly, they brought their maritime technology. The outrigger canoe, called a balangay or barangay in later Filipino languages, wasn't just transportation. It was the foundation of an entire way of life. These vessels allowed fishing in deeper waters where larger fish and marine mammals lived. They enabled trade between islands, creating economic interdependence. They made possible the continuation of the very expansion that had brought Austronesians to the Philippines in the first place. The construction of these boats required specialized knowledge of wood selection, shaping and joining techniques that could create vessels strong enough for ocean crossings, yet light enough to be hauled onto beaches. Built in early society, the barangay system. The social structure that emerged from this Austronesian foundation would prove remarkably enduring, lasting in various forms for thousands of years until Spanish colonization, and in some ways persisting even beyond that. The basic unit of early Filipino society was the barangay, a word that literally referred to the boats that brought the people but came to mean a kinship-based community of 30 to 100 families. The choice of this word is significant. It reflects the maritime origins of these communities and the importance of seafaring to their identity. You belonged to your barangay in the same way you belonged to a boat crew, through kinship, obligation, and mutual dependence. Each barangay was led by a datu, a hereditary chief who combined political, military, and sometimes religious authority. The position typically passed from father to son, though in some communities it could pass through daughters, particularly if they married another datu or produced male heirs. This wasn't absolute monarchy in the European sense. A datu's power depended heavily on his personal qualities, his success in warfare and trade, his wisdom in settling disputes, and his ability to build alliances through maritime trade networks. By the first millennium CE, perhaps 3,000 years after the first Austronesian settlers arrived, their descendants had built the Philippines into a crucial node in Asian maritime trade. This wasn't accidental. It was the product of the same seafaring skills and maritime orientation that had brought the Austronesians to the islands in the first place. Chinese chronicles from the Song dynasty, 960 to 1279 CE, mention trade with people from the islands of Luzon, exchanging Philippine gold, pearls, exotic hardwoods, forest products, and cotton textiles for Chinese porcelain, silk, metal goods, and ceramic jars that became prized heirlooms. Archaeological excavations at sites throughout the Philippines have uncovered Chinese ceramics dating back to the Tang dynasty, 618 to 907 CE, and earlier, some found in burial contexts suggesting they were valuable trade goods. Indian influence arrived through trade as well, though less directly than Chinese goods. Sanskrit loanwords entered Philippine languages. Words related to religion, mathematics, law, and writing systems show Indian origins. The Laguna copperplate inscription, dating to 900 CE and found near Manila, is written in an Old Malay language using an Indian-derived script and refers to a system of debt forgiveness. This single artifact reveals a society engaged in sophisticated economic relationships, using writing for record-keeping and connected to broader Southeast Asian cultural currents.